Good morning, everyone. This week we studied a portion of Vaetchanan, second portion in the book of Deuteronomy, and it's quite a long portion. But there is one specific chapter in the portion that I would like to delve into, and that is a very famous section of the prayer book. I'm referring to the prayer of Shema Israel. In this week's Torah portion, we read the first chapter of the 3 chapters of Shema. Shema contains 3 chapters, Shema, Vayam Shamoa, and Vayomer. The other 2 will appear later. Vayam Shamoa will appear next week. Vayomer, I think, appeared a couple of weeks ago in the book of Numbers. Shema, the first chapter that we recite morning and evening. In the morning prayers, we say it before Hodu once. Anyone who puts on the tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam says it a third time already. And in the evening, we say it in synagogue, and on bedtime, Shema on bedtime, before we go to bed, we say the Shema again. So it's one of the prayers most recited by every person. After God commanding us in the Shema, Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, love God with all your heart, all your might, and all your soul, the Torah begins, Veshinantam levanecha vedibarta bam, translated as, teach them thoroughly to your sons, and speak of them when you sit in your house and when you walk on the way. Teach them to your sons. The rabbis teach us. Sons is not necessarily physical sons, but figuratively. Students, anyone who we inspire that can be learning from us, any Torah knowledge that we have the obligation to teach them. The Rebbe points out a very peculiar law regarding the study of Torah. Rambam Maimonides, who is clarifying every one of the 613 commandments, as well as the Alter Rebbe that codified the Shulchan Aruch, known as Shulchan Aruch Harav, they both begin the law of study Torah with the mitzvah that it's obligatory to teach your son. And then they talk about the obligation to study ourselves. And one can ask, why do you begin with teaching us that I have to teach my sons, or in the case of a teacher, teaching students, and then teach us that you have to study yourself? After all, number one, you cannot teach your son unless you study yourself. Number 2, like every other commandment God gave us, there is an obligation to teach our children. It's called Mitzvah of Chinuch, education, raising our children with the tradition. Part of it, of the Chinuch, is teach them how to put on tefillin, teach them how to put on tzitzis, teaching them what to do and not to do on Shabbat, and teaching them how to study Torah. Yet study of Torah is singled out, that the Torah tells us that you must teach it to your son and then teach it yourself. Veshinantam levanecha, teach your son, and then what does it say? Vedibarta bam, and you should speak in them, you should study Torah.
Rabbi, doesn't it follow if you're teaching your son, you're teaching yourself as well?
Of course, but it applies to every other mitzvah. Yet only by study of Torah, the code of law begins with the obligation to teach a son, and yet you see it in the Torah. The Torah says the Rebbe, there is many, you can explain that the reason the Rambam and Alter Rebbe start the law of studying Torah with the obligation to teach others, because the Torah does so. The Torah tells us that we must study Torah. The mitzvah to study Torah appears in the Torah numerous times. It appears in many ways. It says, Kedoshim tiyu, but there is many places where the Torah is obligating us to study Torah. Yet the place that it's specifically talking about the study of Torah, the obligation to teach sons comes before teaching us. But, says the Rebbe, this itself requires some explanation. Why, when it comes to educating our children how to put on tzitzit and how to celebrate Passover, is also an obligation the Torah gave us, but yet the Torah tells us you learn it and make sure your children know it. Yet by Torah, Veshinantam levanecha comes before vedibarta bam. In fact, there is a question, if someone can afford one teacher, either to him or his son. Who do you think comes first?
Son.
His son. And so that answers your question about how can I teach my son if I don't know? If I cannot, I don't know. My son don't know, and I can afford only one teacher. My son obligation comes first. And this is a peculiar, an anomaly where no other mitzvah God obligates us first to make sure the next generation is aware of, and yet us. So the Rebbe says, the Rebbe is asking it's a two-pronged question, and we'll see how the answer addresses both. The first is, why the mitzvah to study Torah is mentioned in the Torah by teaching us first to teach our son, and then comes to teach us. And number two, in other words, you begin with the child. And again, I'm not speaking about physical child. It can be a figurative child, which is a student. And the second question is, why the study of Torah, the mitzvah to study of Torah, is included in the mitzvah of teaching others. In other words, the Torah wants us to first teach others, and then it says, okay, and you should study too. There is no such example in any other. It doesn't say teach others to keep Shabbat and you keep too. In other words, my obligation to keep Shabbat is not included in an obligation for someone else to keep Shabbat. You teach someone to teach Shabbat after you learn how to keep Shabbat. You teach someone how to keep kosher after you know what to keep kosher. Here in the Mitzvah of Torah, not only the Torah included us with the children, but the Torah tells us that the obligation to study Torah comes because we have to teach others. So the Rebbe says, and I think it's appropriate to share, maybe someone can answer that, the study of Torah, I'm sure everybody can understand that the Torah is like the depth of the ocean, that no matter how deep you dive, you can always discover something new. Until today, we find new treasures, new animals, new plants, new realities in the depth of the darkness of the ocean, or different parts of the oceans that we never knew that they existed. The same is the Torah. The level of knowledge, it's like mining. No matter how far someone reaches, you can always reach farther. So the Torah tells us, and it appears a few places in the prophets, that the time of Mashiach, our study of Torah today would be Hevel. Hevel. You know what Hevel means? A simple breathing of air, extending, giving out air. That's the type of, in other words, no matter how deep I understand Torah today, let's say I'm learning a verse in the Torah of the weekly portion, and I spent 5 hours discovering it and all the sources, etc. When Mashiach will come, it will put light to it and shine it in such a way that whatever we study would see is non-existence. Says the Rebbe, so therefore our study of Torah today is like a child. Compare me to a child who discovering Aleph Bet, is learning to read, and you teach him Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning God created. He doesn't understand all of the universe with DNAs and molecule and the zodiac system. He doesn't. He looks at his candy. He looks at his mom and dad, and that's all. That's the universe. So when he studied the Torah, a child, his knowledge of the Torah is so minute and so limited, confined to such a small ability, and as he matures, he discovers more and more. Our study of Torah today is like a child, because when Mashiach will arrive, it will open up our mind. Suddenly our mind will have an IQ that exponentially larger, and then we'll go back to the verse and say, how didn't we see it? What did we think when we studied any part of the Torah? That's why the Torah says, "V'shinantam levanecha v'divarta bam." Teach your son. Realize that whatever you study is like teaching a child, because the true understanding of Torah will happen when Mashiach will arrive. Harry, you understand that?
But how does one follow the other? If you teach your son first or your student, and then you, what's the inference with this?
that no matter how much study you study, you spend time dipping yourself into the depth of the Torah, it's considered like a child studying, meaning it's very finite, very limited, and it's not even, it's scratching the surface. That's why the Torah wants to hint to us that the study of Torah is so much deeper than we ever going to reach, that when the mitzvah of study Torah comes, God is using the metaphor of teach your son, and then you study yourself. Because the way you study is like someone teaching their son. It's all equal. But the Rebbe says it doesn't make sense for the simple reason. It says that even the mitzvot we perform today are tziyunim, are only markings, only signs, only practice, when compared to the mitzvot we perform when Mashiach will arrive. So when Mashiach will arrive, and I'll do Ahavat Israel, love of fellow Jew, my mitzvah will be performed in such a great level that I look at today's mitzvot, and they are like practicing at best. So when I celebrate Passover, and I celebrate honor your father and mother, the way we celebrate today with all our might and all our energy and all our kavana is still just like a little marking, but not real. In other words, I wouldn't use the word fake because it's not fake, but it does not scratch the surface. Therefore, says the Rebbe, Torah, you're telling me that perhaps God commands us to teach children, and after that we study because our Torah today is like a child studying Torah, and his knowledge of understanding is so minute. It's not unique to Torah. It's every mitzvah. Yet we don't find other mitzvot. God says, teach your son how to keep Shabbat, and you keep Shabbat. The Torah does not say to us, celebrate Passover with your children, and then you celebrate Passover. Torah is different, where the mitzvah starts with teaching the children, and only by teaching children, God adds, also you need to study. We need to understand why. Yes, Harry?
So my inference, what you're saying is, not to disparage anything, but everything about the Akiva and all these people that learn is nothing compared to what they've seen.
Compared to, they themselves said that. In other words, Rabbi Akiva, who knew the Torah better than I know the palm of my hand, and his depth is that for every letter, he would have 70 different explanations. Every letter, not word, not chapter, not story. If I have more than 2 explanations to a story, to a chapter, I'm lucky. He had every letter. And sometimes you see the way he understands the Torah, and you stand in awe. Is this a human being, or it's a God-sent gift to us? Yet he says that the Torah we study, it would be like hevel, like someone uttering a breath of air. That's the level compared to the brain's depth. So you can understand how deep the Torah is. That's why anytime, by the way, it's a side note, anytime someone questions the comparison of religion, I say, I don't understand. Do you have something similar to the Torah? Oh, we have the Bible. I says, come, let's see the Bible. Why does the Torah, why is the words are written in a certain way? Do you realize you have 20, 25, 70 ways that we don't know all of them, but 20 we know explaining the order, why one story next to that? They have no idea. We have here a group of Subotniks, these Ukrainians and Russians that come to study. You know what draws them to here? One of them is ordained priest. He was almost becoming a priest of 1,000 family church. And the reason is he was outvoted by by 2 votes, by a couple. In other words, there was 1,000 couples, and only 2 votes voted for the other one, not him. Why? It's because they have never seen the depth of the study of Torah. It's a non-existent. When you ask a priest or someone who's very knowledgeable from another religion about details of the stories, why is God angry? Why this story? They have no idea. At best, they can guess. By us, we have pages upon pages upon pages. We study in the Talmud about Bilam. Bilam's blessings. Tell us about the curses he wanted to. Which one was fulfilled? Why in this way? Why a cedar? Why an olive tree? All that is debated in the Talmud and the Kabbalah, and it's vast. It's vast. A huge ocean compared to a bath at home, a small bath or a sink. And the same is about the mitzvah. So that's about the Torah. Says the Rebbe that at the time of Mashiach, our depth of understanding of Torah will be so vast that we'll look that all that we study accumulated together is like a breath of air. But says the Rebbe, the performance of mitzvot also, the Talmud tells us, is going to be tziyunim, like a practicing. It will not be the same. So again, the question is, why when it comes to the mitzvah of studying Torah, which is one of 613 commandments, the Torah gives us many places the obligation to study Torah, but yet where that appears clearly is in the Shema, and it starts with Veshinantam Levanecha, and then Vedivarta Bam. And that's why Rambam and Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, when in Code of Law they have this section dealing with the mitzvah of study Torah, they begin with the obligation to teach children or students, and then they go on to explain the details about obligation to study Torah ourselves. And as Harry pointed out correctly, that if I can afford to teach either my son or myself, the mitzvah is to teach my son because the obligation came first. Here is the Rebbe's explanation. And this explanation helps us understand sections of ethics of our fathers, but we're not going to get to it. I'm just showing it to you that's a very deep, I was moved by it. The Rebbe says that when you perform a mitzvah, what part of yourself is involved with the mitzvah, or the crucial part? The crucial part is the action. You're supposed to walk to synagogue as a mitzvah, to pray with your mouth, to put on tefillin with your arm, to celebrate Shabbat with good food or refraining from doing work. All of it has to do with asiyah, action. Action, if you are willing to perform, you are totally nullified to the commander. If I do what you asked me to do, it doesn't matter what I think. I wish he wasn't here. I wish he gave me a shortcut. I wish somebody else helped me. It doesn't matter. The fact that I am fulfilling your desire in itself, not just demonstrate, but it's actual total nullification before the commander. Does it make sense?
This is nullification is what?
No, I'm willing to obey, accepting the yoke, doing it. The fact that I have other things in my mind will not detract, will not take away from the type of relation that's established where you say to me, do something, and I do it. When it comes to study of Torah, says the Rebbe, you know what's the only way to fulfill the mitzvah of study Torah? When you use your brains, and it has to make common sense. If I don't understand, if you don't understand something, and I say to you, it doesn't matter, you're not studying Torah. The only way to study Torah is using your brains. And therefore, if I do not understand the Torah, or I do not accept the one who is teaching to know and to give me the truth of the knowledge of the idea, then I don't study Torah. So here, my self-ego, my selfness is very involved in the serving of God. And it can cause a blockade, a border, a barrier between me and God. Therefore, God wants us to have, before we start the study of Torah, we have a mitzvah, which is to say the blessing of the Torah. Did you know that you're not allowed to study Torah unless you say Birkat Torah, the blessing of Torah? It says that the reason the first temple was destroyed is because Sheloi Borchu B'Torah, they studied Torah, but they did not say the blessing prior to the study. In other words, they did not nullify themselves before God. So therefore, it's written, we say it every morning. And if I meet someone and I ask him to put on tefillin, and he wasn't in synagogue in the morning, most of the times I ask him to say the blessing of Torah, because he's saying Shema. Shema is part of the prayer, but it's also a chapter of the Torah. You cannot say it unless you say the blessing of the Torah. That's when you wake up, after I wash hands and I go and drink my coffee, sometimes I want to study Torah. Not allowed to, unless I say Birkot HaShachar, which includes the blessing of the Torah. Therefore, says the Rebbe, there are two prongs into this uniqueness. Number one, before you start the study of Torah, taking your mind into the connection, you need to have an introduction. You need to say to yourself, I do it because God commanded me, and therefore I am serving God. The introduction. That's why the introduction of the obligation to study Torah comes with teach it to your child. Children are totally nullified to the adults. That's the introduction to the study of Torah. So how do I know I have to study Torah? God told me, teach your son, and then you study. Before you study, you need to know that the study of Torah must be done the way you teach a child, and a child is totally nullified and is willing to accept everything. But then when it comes to study Torah itself, if you don't understand and it doesn't make sense to you, you did not fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah. If I perform the mitzvah of Passover, eating bitter herbs, and it doesn't make sense to me, but I ate it, I fulfilled the mitzvah, there is nothing wrong. If it doesn't make sense to me to honor my father and mother, it doesn't matter. I honor my father and mother, I made a mitzvah. If I study Torah, it doesn't make sense to me, I didn't study Torah. Therefore, when someone contradicts me, so first we talked about the introduction. There must be the blessing before the Torah, which is unique. Then comes a second one. While I study in the Torah, someone comes up with a different idea. Someone comes up and disagrees and contradicts my understanding. I would like to say, I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense to me, so I don't agree with you, and we move on. Says the Rebbe, sometimes it happens totally because of my ego. My ego does not allow me to accept that someone understands better than I do. My ego does not allow me to let someone else's understanding be part of the study. That's why God says, you know where you learn to study Torah from the obligation to teach your son. When you teach your son, the son is totally nullified and he's like a sponge. He absorbs everything you teach him, and he try to understand. You want to make sure he understand, not just parroting the words. Same is the obligation to study Torah by me and you, has to be made, with the introduction that the Torah was given to children first, meaning you have to make a blessing before you study Torah. And remember, the Torah you study is a godly Torah. Therefore, you nullify yourself before God. And number two, while you study Torah, be open, be nullified, even though your brain needs to make sense and understand, which makes yourself feel very special. Allow for someone else's opinion. Allow for someone else's criticism and questions, because they realize that if you do not allow and not listen and debate, allowing a debate and discussion, you're shutting down as your ego is taking over you. In that way, there is no other mitzvah where we need to prevent this type of conduct of behavior. And therefore, God says, you know how you have a mitzvah to eat matzah on Passover. You have a mitzvah to be kind to animals. It's all about action. But when it comes to one mitzvah, which you need to use your brains, the Torah says, first, v'shinantam levanecha, first teach your son, then v'dibart bam. So when God introduces the mitzvah, number one, he introduces it through the obligation to teach others, teach children or students who are not as fluent in the Torah, meaning when you study Torah, you have to make a blessing for the Torah before, nullify yourself like a child. And number two, while you study Torah, remember that the obligation was given to children before it's given to you, because you need to nullify yourself and allow for variations of opinion, allow for difference of understandings. And if someone comes up with a different reading or a different explanation, you always give room for somebody else. Now we can understand why the Shema begins with Veshinantam Levanecha, and teach your son, and then V'dibart bam. And Rashi says, Veshinantam Levanecha, Elu atalmidim. It's the students, people who are below you. That explains many texts in Ethics of Our Fathers. As the Rebbe is going to go on and give like 3 or 4 examples. For me, there is a rabbi in Ethics of Fathers and says that Umitalmidai yoter mikulam. I gain knowledge from my masters. I gain knowledge from my friends. I gain knowledge from my teachers. But for my students, I gain more knowledge than anybody else, because they debate and they argue and they give differences of opinions. And by doing so, it sharpens the mind and sharpens the idea and define it in a very concise and clear way. That's why the Torah tells us that if you want to study Torah and delve deep into God's mindset and understanding, it has to be with total nullification, where you allow for someone else's view or understanding of the same text. Good Shabbos, everybody.
King David said the same thing. You come